The story begins in the early 1800s, in Charleston, South Carolina. Back then, Charleston wasn't just a quiet southern city. It was a vital port, buzzing with sailors, merchants, and weary travelers moving up and down the coast. Carriages rattled over cobblestone streets, markets filled with the smell of tobacco and saltwater, and just beyond the city limits, the roads grew darker, more dangerous. Travelers had to be careful. Highwaymen and thieves often preyed on the vulnerable, and many inns and way stations were not always what they seemed. 6 miles outside the heart of Charleston stood a small inn known as the 6-Mile Wayfarer House. It was the perfect resting stop for those who had been on the road too long, too tired to push through the final stretch into the city. Run by a husband and wife, John and Lavinia Fisher, the inn offered food, a warm fire, and a comfortable bed. At first glance, the Fishers seemed ordinary, almost welcoming. John was known as polite, with a steady hand for business. But it was Lavinia who caught the attention of visitors. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and carried herself with unusual confidence for a woman of her time. Many men who passed through the inn described her as charming, even magnetic. And in a world where most inns were run by rough men, a beautiful hostess seemed to make the 6-Mile Wayfarer House feel safer than the rest. But whispers began to spread in Charleston. Whispers that something was not right at the 6 Mile. Travelers who stopped there sometimes never made it into the city. Their horses were found abandoned, their belongings scattered, but the men themselves? They seemed to vanish without a trace. Behind the polished smiles of John and Lavinia Fisher, something darker appeared to be hiding. And soon, the legend of America's so-called first female serial killer was about to begin. According to legend, the Fishers were far more than simple innkeepers. They had devised a scheme so cruel, so calculated, that it blurred the line between hospitality and horror. They preyed on a very specific type of victim, lone male travelers. Men passing through Charleston who carried money, weapons, or valuables. Men who could disappear without drawing much attention. The story goes that when a guest arrived, Lavinia herself would welcome him with a warm smile. She'd offer him food, a soft bed, and, most famously, a cup of tea. But this wasn't ordinary tea. It was said to be laced with oleander leaves, a natural poison strong enough to weaken even the toughest man. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The tea was sweet, warm, comforting after a long day's ride. But within minutes, a drowsiness would settle in. Muscles heavy, eyes struggling to stay open. The guest would stumble toward his room, unaware he had just walked straight into a trap. Because the bed itself wasn't safe. Hidden beneath the mattress was a trapdoor, rigged with a lever. When Lavinia gave the signal, John would pull it, and in an instant, the bed would collapse beneath its victim. The man wouldn't even have time to scream before he was swallowed into the darkness below, tumbling into the cellar. Down there, in the pitch black, he'd find no escape. The Fishers would descend, rob him of his possessions, and, if the legends are true, murder him to ensure silence. Pause, lower voice for suspense. But that's not where the horror ends. According to some accounts, when authorities finally investigated the 6-Mile Wayfarer House, they found far more than stolen goods. Beneath the inn, in shallow graves and hidden pits, were bones. Human bones. Skulls with empty sockets staring out from the dirt. Some said there were a dozen bodies. Others claimed there were dozens more. Victims faceless and forgotten. Their last memory a cup of tea and a smile from Lavinia Fisher. Rise of bones beneath the inn. The court never charged them with murder. Instead, the Fishers were found guilty of highway robbery. In 1820, that alone was enough to seal their fate. Because in South Carolina at the time, robbery on the open road was a capital offense. Punishable by death. But like many legends, the truth becomes harder to pin down. For all the chilling rumors of poisoned tea and trapdoors, the evidence was never so clear. What we do know is this. In 1819, local authorities could no longer ignore the whispers surrounding the 6-Mile Wayfarer House. Too many travelers had gone missing. Too many stories pointed back to John and Lavinia Fisher. And so, the law came knocking. The 6 Mile was raided, and what the officers found only deepened suspicion. The Fishers weren't acting alone. It was said they had ties to a gang that terrorized the roads outside Charleston, bandits who preyed on stagecoaches and unsuspecting travelers. The once charming inn now looked more like a trap, a front for organized crime. But the most chilling piece of the puzzle came from a single survivor. A traveler by the name of David Ross claimed he had stopped at the inn one night. Lavinia welcomed him in with her usual smile and offered him tea. But Ross had heard the rumors. Suspicious of her kindness, he waited until she turned away, then quietly dumped the tea out. That decision may have saved his life. Because later, as he lay in bed, he heard a strange sound, wood creaking, metal scraping. Suddenly, his bed began to collapse beneath him. In a rush of panic, Ross leapt to the floor just in time, stumbling toward the door. Behind him, the bed frame crashed into darkness, revealing what could only have been the infamous trapdoor. Heart-pounding, Ross fled into the night. He ran without looking back, through the woods and dirt roads, until he reached Charleston to raise the alarm. And this time, authorities listened. Soon after, Lavinia and John Fisher were arrested. The entire city buzzed with the news. Charleston's infamous innkeepers, finally caught. But when they stood trial, something strange happened. Despite all the rumors, despite the terrifying testimony of Ross, despite the stories of bones beneath the inn, the court never charged them with murder. Instead, the Fishers were found guilty of highway robbery. In 1820, that alone was enough to seal their fate. Because in South Carolina at the time, robbery on the open road was a capital offense, punishable by death. February 18, 1820. The morning was heavy with anticipation. Word had spread across Charleston, and by midday, a massive crowd had gathered. Men, women, even children pressed together, eager to witness what was about to unfold. Public executions were grim entertainment at the time, and today's would be unlike any other. At the center of it all were John and Lavinia Fisher, two innkeepers who had become the talk of the city. Shackled and pale, they were led toward the gallows that loomed over the crowd like a shadow of judgment. For John, the end came quietly. He spoke few words, bowing his head, asking for forgiveness from God and man alike. Some in the crowd murmured that he looked broken, a man resigned to his fate. But Lavinia was something else entirely. Instead of appearing in morning black, she arrived in a striking white dress, her wedding gown. A final act of defiance, or perhaps a symbol of her youth and beauty, even in the face of death. As she ascended the wooden steps to the platform, her eyes swept over the sea of faces below. Witnesses later swore she held her head high, unflinching, as if daring the crowd to look away. The executioner moved to place the noose around her neck, but Lavinia stopped him. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out over the hushed crowd. And then she spoke the words that would seal her legend forever. "If any of you have a message for the devil, tell me now, for I shall see him in a moment." Gasps rippled through the spectators. Some women turned away. Children clung to their mothers. Even hardened men whispered that her words carried a chill straight from hell itself. And then, the silence fell. The trap beneath her feet creaked as it was pulled back. For a fraction of a second, Lavinia's defiant figure hovered above the crowd, before the platform gave way. The rope snapped tight. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. The crowd stood frozen. Some claimed they saw her eyes burning with fury even in that final moment. Others swore her scream echoed long after her body fell still. What is certain is this: with that final act of defiance, Lavinia Fisher ensured her name would never be forgotten. She did not die quietly. She died with fire, with venom, with a line so unforgettable that it has haunted Charleston for more than 2 centuries. And in that instant, the legend of America's first female serial killer was born. But here's the question that still haunts historians more than 200 years later. Was Lavinia Fisher truly the monster we believe her to be, or has her story been exaggerated into legend? The truth is far murkier than the tales suggest. Despite the chilling rumors of poisoned tea and trapdoors, there is no official evidence that Lavinia ever killed anyone. No records of bones discovered in the cellar. No victims confirmed by name. The court records from 1819 and 1820 speak only of robbery and highway attacks. Serious crimes, yes, but nothing that ties Lavinia directly to murder. So where did the legend of America's first female serial killer begin? Many scholars argue it started decades after her death. Charleston, with its haunted history and thriving tourism, was fertile ground for ghost stories. Over time, storytellers began weaving tales of poisoned tea, hidden levers, and mass graves beneath the inn. Each retelling added new horrors, until Lavinia Fisher was no longer just a convicted robber. She became a symbol of female wickedness. And perhaps that's the most revealing detail of all. In the early 1800s, society was fascinated and terrified by the idea of a woman stepping outside her proper role. A woman accused of violence, crime, and defiance against authority was not just dangerous, she was scandalous. To many, it may have been easier to paint Lavinia as a bloodthirsty killer than to admit she might have simply been a criminal swept up in her husband's gang. Still, there are those who believe the legends must hold a grain of truth. After all, why would so many stories survive for so long if there wasn't something sinister lurking beneath them? Was Lavinia just a victim of folklore? Or was she clever enough to cover her tracks, leaving behind only whispers and rumors? And then there is her final moment, her chilling last words. Even if she wasn't a murderer, those words sealed her reputation forever. They transformed her from a convicted robber into a figure of Gothic infamy. So we're left with a haunting question. Was Lavinia Fisher really America's first female serial killer? Or was she simply a woman demonized by legend, her story twisted into a cautionary tale about beauty, charm, and evil? Perhaps the truth died with her that February morning. And perhaps that's why Lavinia Fisher still lingers in our imagination, not as a woman of flesh and blood, but as a ghostly figure, standing at the edge of history, smiling through the noose. Asterisk.